Hi friends, welcome back to Hebraic Creations. Last time we looked at the meaning of lawlessness, and we will continue to study that in light of Nehemiah Gordon's book, The Hebrew Yeshua versus the Greek Jesus. I mentioned this guy a few videos back. He was one of the men Michael Rood credits for his contribution to the chronological Gospels. Nehemiah is the son of an Orthodox rabbi, so he was raised a modern Pharisee. He attended Hebrew school at a young age and studied the Talmud and other Jewish manuscripts. He received degrees in archaeology and biblical studies at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He's fluent in ancient and modern Hebrew and reads dialects of Aramaic, Syriac, and Greek. His professional experience is in ancient biblical texts, and he worked for several years as a translator on the Dead Sea Scrolls project. He rejected his Orthodox upbringing and now professes to be a Karaite Jew. Karaites are devoted scripturalists who uphold the Torah and reject rabbinic innovations. And although Nehemiah does not accept Yeshua as Messiah, he does appreciate Yeshua's Karaite ways. Michael Rood states in the introduction to Nehemiah's book that he received Nehemiah's name covertly by a speaker at an Israeli New Moon Society meeting. Apparently, Nehemiah is greatly feared in the Orthodox community in Israel for his willingness to expose what I will call rabbinic lawlessness. In chapter 3 of his book, The Hebrew Yeshua versus the Greek Jesus, which was published in 2006, Nehemiah outlines what he calls the 5 fundamental principles of the Pharisees, practiced in Yeshua's day and still alive and well today. He renames them the 5 iniquities. And from my last message, we know that the word iniquities is just another term for lawlessness. Before we dive into this, I want to state that although I do advocate getting in touch with our Hebrew roots and our Hebrew Messiah, I do not advocate adopting the foibles of Judaism. The discussion we have here will show that the lawless spirit behind the Hellenization of our modern Bibles and Christian practices is the very same spirit behind the religious beliefs and practices of many Messianic and Orthodox Jewish communities today. I'm not judging anyone, Christian or Jew. I'm just pointing out our need to return to the Torah. Okay, so here's the 5 iniquities that Nehemiah Gordon writes about in his book. Rabbis claim there are 2 Torahs. That's the first one. The second one is rabbis exert extreme authority. The third one is that rabbis give irrational interpretations. The fourth one is that rabbis make up brand new laws. And finally, the 5th one is that rabbis establish precedent. The last 2 are mentioned in a previous video. And as I expound on each one of these, I will point out parallels to the Christian church. First iniquity. Rabbis claim there are 2 Torahs that were given on Mount Sinai, an oral and a written one. The written Torah is the law of Moses, but the invented oral Torah was supposedly designed to keep Jehovah's word out of Gentile hands to prevent Hellenization. The oral Torah has 3 parts: the Mishnah, the Talmud, and Midrash. Having 2 Torahs can be likened to the Hebrew Yeshua and a Greek Jesus, 2 different people with 2 different messages. Second iniquity. Rabbis have supreme authority. What they say is binding, even if it's wrong or contradicts the written Torah. They counsel their followers in religious and family matters. And Nehemiah gives examples of rabbis who claim their authority even supersedes Yehovah. This can be likened to the Pope, or in Protestant circles, the shepherding movement. The third iniquity. Rabbis give irrational interpretations. They actually twist the written Torah to say what they want. Instead of actually interpreting it they often reinvent the law of Moses. The example Nehemiah gives in his book is where rabbis use Exodus chapter 23, verse 2, to defend their use of a majority vote to make rules binding when, in fact, the passage is just talking about what's right and doing what's right, even when you're the lone voice. This is sort of like saying any alcohol consumption is a sin when only excess is pointed out as a sin in the Torah. The fourth iniquity, rabbis make up brand new laws. I mentioned this a few videos back while discussing Matthew chapter 23, verse 2 to 3. The word for this is takanot. It's enactments of extra biblical rules, which often negate biblical law. Oh, rabbis built such elaborate spiritual fences to ensure that the people would in no way come anywhere close to breaking the law. Yeshua called these commandments of men. An example is the hand-washing rituals for before eating a meal or getting out of bed even in the morning. This is like churches forbidding women to wear makeup. It's just not in the Torah. The fifth iniquity, rabbis establish precedents. I mentioned this one also a few videos back when we were talking about Matthew 23, verses 2 to 3. The word for this is ma'asim, legal precedent for righteous behavior. These were folk customs that were observed by a Jewish community. They did this for so long, these eventually became law, equal to or above Torah. Yeshua called these traditions of men. An example is the yarmulke, or skull cap. After men have covered their heads for 200 years, it's now binding. This reminds me of how suits and dresses used to be the required church attire. So all five iniquities are examples of lawlessness, adding to and subtracting from the Torah, which was expressly forbidden by Yehovah, as we've noted before. It really annoyed Yeshua that Pharisees would sit in the seat of Moses, assuming the authority of Moses, yet taking unlawful liberties with the word of Yehovah. As a result, Yeshua called the Pharisees, "You blind chairs." That's in Matthew 23:16. That is in the corrected King James Version. All other Greek-based translations say blind guides. The only other place the seat of Moses is mentioned is in Matthew 23, verse 2 to 3. Remember, we looked at that a few messages ago. It's the passage where the Greek translation has Yeshua telling the people to obey everything that the Pharisees say, which contradicts everything else Yeshua says in Matthew 23, while the Hebrew translation has Yeshua telling the people to only obey Moses, not the Pharisees. This error happened because of one word being translated, they, meaning the Pharisees, versus he, meaning Moses. The mistake all boils down to a single Hebrew letter, the letter Vav, which is one stroke of the pen. Nehemiah discovered this error after examining several copies of the Shem Tov Hebrew Matthew. This is one of the 28 Hebrew Matthew manuscripts Michael Rood used in his corrected King James Version of the Scriptures, which is only found in the chronological Gospels. The Shem Tov was written by a man named Ibn Shaprut, a 14th century Jew living in Spain during the Inquisition. This was a treatise refuting Catholicism to help fellow Jews defend themselves from bishops who forced them into public debates called disputations. The Hebrew Matthew was only an appendix to this treatise, and it was assumed to have a Greek or Latin source. That is, until 1980, when George Howard, a linguist teaching at Mercer University in Georgia, found evidence of these unique Hebrew word puns, or what could be called poetic prose, indicating that Shem Tov was copied from an early manuscript of ancient Hebrew Matthew. However, Nehemiah thinks portions of it are still infected by Greek translation and influence. Maybe that's why Dr. Miles Jones is so excited about studying and translating the Catalina Gospels. As you can see, the search for the most original, most pure Hebrew gospel continues. If you're interested, Shem Tov is available for purchase online. Well, that wraps it up for this time. I suspect that with all of the talk about observing the Torah, you're probably wondering if we should be stoning bad people and sacrificing goats in our backyard. That's not a bad question, but the discussion will have to wait till next time. Stay tuned. Shalom.